Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording from our 2021 Elul Learning Series.
It is lovely to see you and lovely that there will be those of you on the podcast listening to this, maybe closer to Rosh Hashanah, who knows? But this is something that has been going on in Temple Beth Am called Haftarah, Plethora, though if you read it and you don't know that that's how it's supposed to be said, you would think it would be Haftarah, Plethora, but it doesn't sound as nice that way. And this is something that Larry and Rick and behind the scenes Norm put on for the Temple Beth Am community every week. And they go through different Haftarah kind of nuances and stories and maybe different tropes and interesting facts about the Haftarah that we might be reading, given that we don't usually spend so much time looking at the Haftarah. So they decided that for this this part of our Elul series, that they would dive into Rosh Hashanah Day 2 Haftarah. And they're going to do the same type of podcast that they do every week and video that they do every week for us as a high holiday edition. So I'm very excited to be able to be here live. I have watched but never been live for one of these, and thank you for bringing this element of Torah to us for our high holiday preparation.
Yirmiyahu was a prophet, was a good chaver of mine. Never understood a single word he said, but we helped him to drink his yain. And we always have some mighty fine yain. Singing Simchat Le'olam, Kol HaYildim now. Simchat to the dagim in the deep blue sea. Simchat to you and me.
Welcome to the Haftarah Plethora video podcast, where we might not bring joy to the world, but we do talk about Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and all the other prophets.
At least the ones who got their prophecies and writings accepted into the Grand Academy of Haftarot.
You're right, Rick. We miss out on Nahum, Zephaniah, and Haggai. Maybe we'll do a special show on those unfortunate prophets and call it the Haftarah-less trio. But today, we're going to examine and chant the Haftarah for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. You know what that means, don't you?
Yeah, it'll be the first time that many of our viewers will actually hear this Haftarah, since by the time we get to it on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, most people are stuffed, have had their share of shul, and are ready for a nap.
Well, that too. But I was referring to the fact that we're finally breaking out of our streak of Haftarah Plethora episodes on Isaiah. We just finished our 7th in a row this week, and we're finally back to Jeremiah, our musical namesake, an inspiration for the frog theme of our graphics. Anyway, I'm Larry Herman, sipping some very fine wine and talking Haftarah today with my very good chaver, the king of cantillation, Rick Muller. How you doing on this beautiful Sunday afternoon, Rick?
I'm great. 2 Haftarah Plethoras in 1 week and a chance to actually see all of our fans. What could be better?
I can only think of one thing.
And I know what that is.
It's
Millie
time. That's right, Rick. Being with and talking about my granddaughter Millie outweighs every other pleasure.
And what's that precious and precocious kid up to this week?
Well, she's not yet reciting Haftarah, but she is starting to sit up.
Looks like gravity helped her slide out of that chair a little bit.
Yeah, she wiggled out before I could strap her in there. But here she is, sitting up in a new high chair that we got for her.
Someday soon you'll have a chumash in front of her so she can follow along with Zadie.
Ha ha ha. And Millie has a couple of protectors in Stevie and Billy, who think that she's part of their pack.
Seems like she thinks so too.
Well, before this show goes to the dogs, let's get back to the Haftarah for the second day of Rosh Hashanah.
Some of our viewers may not be familiar with what we do here. Perhaps we should give them a general explanation.
Sure, Rick. In the Haftarah Plethora, we take a look at the weekly Haftarah read on Shabbat. Although for this Haftarah Plethora Live, we're talking about the Haftarah for the second day of Rosh Hashanah, which comes from Jeremiah. Usually, I try to give an overview of the text, place it into some kind of context, and then highlight the main message, themes, symbols, or linguistic patterns found in the text.
Usually with a little bit of humor.
Or at least I try to find something to lighten up the atmosphere. I try to first examine the text with fresh eyes and not simply rehash what commentators such as Rashi have to say. I often find it useful to compare the translation by Robert Alter to the JPS commentary found in the Eitz Chaim Chumash and the Lev Shalem Machzor.
And we often complain about the JPS translation.
I think with good reason, as I expect to demonstrate again today.
Can't wait. I generally focus on the trope or the cannellation marks of the text. I like to explain how the Masoretes, mainly Aaron ben Asher and Shlomo ben Buya, added these musical notations as a form of commentary, accentuating certain words and phrases that they thought particularly meaningful. The tropes instruct us how to read the text, linking some words together, keeping some words apart. One general rule is that the rarest trope are usually an indication of the most important or pivotal ideas in the Haftarah or the Torah reading. It works there too.
And I like to point out how certain trope add a sense of drama and feeling. And we each have our favorites. I'm partial to the Kadma Vazla.
And I like the Dargat Tavirs.
We usually break the chanting of the Haftarah down into several sections and talk about the highlights before Rick chants the section.
Why don't we just get on with our examination of the Haftarah for the second day of Rosh Hashanah?
Good idea, Rick. This Haftarah comes from what is called the Book of Consolation. It's not actually a separate book, but rather chapters 30 and 31 of the book of Jeremiah. It's called the Book of Consolation for two reasons. First, the second verse of chapter 30 tells us that God instructed Jeremiah to write down in a scroll all the words that I have spoken to you, I being God. Ergo, a scroll or a book. And second, the verses in these two chapters are proclamations of hope and promises of restoration and reunification of the Jewish people. Hence, consolation.
Okay, that sounds like a nice theme for Rosh Hashanah.
Perhaps, but I'm actually not so convinced. First of all, what are the themes of Rosh Hashanah, Rick?
Well, there's creation, tshuva, repentance, renewal. After all, it's the beginning of the new year. And awe, it's the beginning of the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe.
Excellent. And as we'll see, only one of those themes, tshuva, is remotely mentioned in the Haftarah. But there are also three themes that appear in the Rosh Hashanah Musaf service: Malchuyot, kingship, Zichronot, or remembrance, and Shofrot, shofar. And once again, only one of these themes, Zichronot, is actually mentioned in the Haftarah.
Now that I think of it, Rosh Hashanah is more of an individual, introspective holiday. It's not so much a national day. We don't usually think about restoration or reunification. So why did our sages choose these verses as the Haftarah for the second day?
I'll get into that in just a moment. Remember, Jeremiah was a Judean.
Not a bullfrog.
No, not a bullfrog, who lived through the Babylonian conquest of the southern kingdom of Judea. But all the verses in our Haftarah refer to the restoration of Israel, the northern kingdom, following the Assyrian conquest and exile of the 10 tribes. Jeremiah uses a variety of terms to let us know that he and God are talking about the northern kingdom. These include Israel, maiden Israel, the hills of Samaria, the heights of Ephraim, the remnant of Israel, the northland, father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. There are numerous references to Ephraim, as Ephraim was the strongest of the northern tribes, and therefore a symbol of all of Israel.
You still haven't explained the link between our Haftarah and Rosh Hashanah?
I'm getting to that just now. It's in the last 3 verses of the Haftarah. Remember, Adonai is doing the declaring through the words of Jeremiah. In verse 18, God tells Rachel, the grandmother of Ephraim, that he hears Ephraim, or is it Israel, expressing words of tshuva. It reads, "You have chastised me, and I am chastised, like a calf that has not been broken. Receive me back, let me return, for you, O Lord, are my God." And then, in the next verse, Ephraim continues with the words of regret and a plea for forgiveness. "Now that I have turned back, I am filled with remorse. I am ashamed and humiliated, for I bear the disgrace of my youth." And finally, in verse 20, come remembrance and acceptance by God. I don't like the JPS translation of this verse at all, so I'm going to use a translation found in the Sachs Koren Machzor. It reads, "Is Ephraim not a treasured son to me, my child of delights? As I speak of him always, I remember him again. I will tender him compassion, says the Lord."
I get it. These three verses emphasize the role of tshuva and the hope that we have to be remembered by God and then treated with compassion. That's the hope we all have on Rosh Hashanah.
And that's the link to Rosh Hashanah. In fact, this last verse, beginning with Haven Yakir Li, appears at the end of the Zichronot section of the Rosh Hashanah Musaf service.
And it's been made into a song many times over, I suppose. I just know one of them. When I was young, it went, Haven Yakir Li Ephraim, Im Yeledim, Yeled Shashuim. It went on for a long time and very dramatic.
Very nice.
That's what I remember of it.
All right, that was very nice.
Okay, and fine. So do we have time to discuss the tropes now?
Sure, Rick, there's always time to discuss the trope. What have you got?
I generally want to make 2 points and then talk more about the trope before I chant each section. In the past, I've explained that the Masoretes, the rabbis of the tradition, divided the text into sections by using pays and samachs. Pay for petucha, it's open, samach for stuma, for closed. But how did they know where to put the section breaks? This week, the rare munach lagarme, which is a pair of munachs separated by a vertical line, helps us to understand. There are 3 of them in our Haftarah, each followed by a raviyah, falling on the phrase, Ko Amar Adonai, thus said the Lord, very important statement for Jeremiah. That's a signal phrase for a new section, a new set of ideas. In fact, there's one more, Ko Amar Adonai, without the munach lagarme, on the first verse of the Haftarah.
But there's one more petucha after verse 9. That's not followed by a Ko Amar Adonai.
Glad you mentioned that, because verse 10 begins with the words Shim'u Dvar Adonai, or hear the word of the Lord, which is very similar, and this also indicates a section break.
Wow. Now we know what to look for when we see those pays and samachs.
The other trope thing I wanted to explain is the use of the rare Zarka Segol combination, which appears 3 times, each of which echoes your description of the Haftarah as being about restoration and reunification. So the trope helped with the theme. In verse 8, we have the kibatz tim miyarketei haaretz, meaning gather them from the ends of the earth. In verse 9, we have uvtachanu nim ovilem, meaning in supplication I will lead them. And in verse 12, we have uva'u v'rinanu v'imron Sion, meaning they shall come and sing gladly on the heights of Zion. So all those 3 affirm the theme of restoration and reunification. I'll have more to say later. There's 7 yativs, 2 zakev gadols, and there's others before I chant each section. So what are the divisions going to be this week?
Since you already explained so nicely, let's follow the divisions that the Masoretes established with their pays and samachs. We'll start with verses 2 through 6, where God proclaims the return of the northern kingdom, Israel. Then continue with verses 7 through 9, which speak of the ingathering of Jacob and the remnant of Israel. Verses 10 through 14 are an address to the nations of the world, where God explains that he who scattered Israel will gather them in. Verse 15 is a section all by itself, with a sad Rachel weeping for her children. Then verses 16 and 17, Rachel is comforted by God with news of the return of her children to their land, and we'll close with verses 18 through 20, where God accepts the repentance of Ephraim on behalf of Israel, and we hope on behalf of all of us.
Sounds great. I just have 2 comments on the first section, 2 through 6. First, the Zakif Gadol at the beginning of verse 3 on Merachok. The word is from afar, perhaps emphasizing how distant the people had been from God. And then the 4 examples of the yativ, the little arrowhead, sharp piercing, but short trope that's usually assigned to short words that require attention. Here we see it on ko, the very beginning, on od in verse 4, which means again, and then again in verse 5, and then kumu in verse 6. There the yativ accentuates the command to get up. It's a dramatic.
Rick, time for the bracha and then to start chanting. The Haftarah is found on page 1231 of Eitz Chaim Chumash, on page 111 of the Lev Shalem Machzor, and, technology and Normgar permitting, should appear on your screen for you to follow along.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And then, Ko amar Adonai, matzachen bamidbar, am sridei charev, haloch lahargio Yisrael, merachok. Adonai nirali, be'ahavat olam ahavtich, al ken Meshachtich chased, od evnech v'nivneit betulat Yisrael, od tadit tupayich v'yatzat b'mechol mesachaki, od tit'ich ramim beharei Shomron, Natu notim v'chilelu, ki yeshom karu notzrim v'har Ephraim, kumu v'na'alet Zion, el Adonai Eloheinu.
Very nice. Rick, I see that in the next section, I get my favorite trope, a kadma v'azla, preceded by Tlisha Katana. What's all that about?
Right. In verse 8, we've got hineni, which means behold. And then you have mevi otam, on I will bring them in. The restoration, as you have noted. Knowing what we know, we can attach the hope that our tshuva will be accepted. And we have yet another yativ on the small word bam, also in verse 8, meaning in them. Everyone will be included in this great ingathering.
Let's hope so. Rick, chant verses 7 through 9.
Kicho amar Adonai, ronu li'Yaakov simcha, v'tzahalu berosh hagoyim, hashmiu halalu ve'imru, hosha Adonai et amcha, et sherit Yisrael. And then, hineni mevi otam me'eretz Safon, ve'kibatztim miyarkete aretz, bam iver ufiseach, harav yoledet yachtav, kahal gadol yashuvu heina, bivechi yavou uvtachanunim, ovilem olichem el nachale mayim, b'derech yashar lo yikashlu bach, ki ayiti liYisrael le'av, ve'Ephraim bechorihu.
Very nice. In the next section, Rick, we have the second Zakef Gadol on the word ugoalo in verse 11. Is that special?
I think so. Are you kidding me? It's what this Haftarah and Rosh Hashanah are all about, redemption. Here the verse refers to Jacob, whose other name was Yisrael, all part of the same theme, just like you said. And we've also got a Gershaim in verse 12, on the word v'naharu, which means shine. We talked about this word in the Haftarah Plethora for Ki Tavo this week. It's in the Haftarah for Shabbat. The people will shine brightly on the heights of Zion. Back to chanting. Verse 10. Next one, Norm. There we go. Shimu dvar Adonai goyim v'hagidu va'iyim mimerchak ve'imru mizarei Yisrael yikabtsenu ushmaro kiroe edro kifada Adonai et Yaakov ugalo miad chazak mimenu uva'u v'rinenu v'imrom Tzion v'naharu el tuv Adonai al dagan ve'al tirosh ve'al yitzhar ve'al b'nei tzon uvakar ve'haita nafsham kegan rave v'lo yosifu l'da'ava od az tismach betula b'machol uvachurim uzkenim yachdav v'hafachti evlam l'sason v'nichamtim v'simachtim migonam v'riveti nefesh hakohanim dashen ve'ami et tuvi yisba'u neum Adonai.
Rick, verse 15 is all by itself.
Yeah, it's lonely, man. Just like Rachel weeping for her children, she's lonely. We have several words of bitter wailing and crying here. Bechi, tamrurim, nehi we have, and mivaka. Rachel refuses to be comforted, as the Tavir on Ma'anah shows us.
I'm almost brought to tears myself. Chant verse 15, Rick.
Ko amar Adonai Kol berama nishma nehi bechi tamrurim Rachel mevaka al baneha me'ana le'inachem al baneha ki einenu.
So sad. Rick, let me try my hand at this next section. Besides the koamar, the only special trope here is the Telisha Ketana on the tiny word ki in verse 16. But if we read this verse, we can see that this is the pivot or the fulcrum of the entire Haftarah. God is telling Rachel to hold back her weeping. Why? Because that little word ki, or because, introduces the reason. Her children shall return. That little word with a dramatic Telisha Ketana points us to the uplifting conclusion. Sing it for us, Rick, and hit that key really hard.
Oh, Amar Adonai, Min'i kolech mi bechi, ve'enayich mi dim'a, ki yesh sachar lifulatech Neum Adonai, v'shavu me'eretz oyev, v'yesh tikva la'acharitech, Neum Adonai, v'shavu vanim ligvulam.
There's hope there, huh? Tikva.
Yes.
We've already talked about the last three verses, but the final verse, verse 20, deserves a bit more attention. First, we have the Telisha Ketana Kadma V'Azla combination on the start of Haven Yakirli, is Ephraim not my dear son? And then we've got Ephraim saying, Hashiveni va'ashuva. Bring me back that I may return. A great Rosh Hashanah sentiment, and one that the rabbis have included in the plural when we return the Torah to the Ark. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva. And also something we said last night in the Slichot service.
And that reminds me of the Torah reading for the second day of Rosh Hashanah, another connection, when Abraham tells his servants, V'nashuva, they're going to do their thing on the mountain. V'nashuva, the nun is the plural, we're going to come back, indicating that he will be returning with Isaac and not alone.
And there's another thing. There's a pair of repeated words that seem to give translators fits. In verse 19, God says, Zachor eskarenu od. And later in the same verse, we have Rachem acharamenu.
And don't forget that in verse 18, before we have the repetition, Shamoa Shamati.
Exactly. And I don't like the JPS translation of any of them. The repetition surely should read as surely.
Don't call me Shirley. But you're right. Doubling the word, at least the shoresh, is a way of providing emphasis, like surely or certainly. And your point is?
That I don't like the JPS translation. The better translation would be, of these three, first, I have surely heard. And then, I will surely remember him. And then, I will surely show him mercy.
Like you said, translation's difficult.
And an art. Rick, take us home.
Shamoa Shamati, Ephraim mitnoded, Yisartani va'ivaser, ke'egel lo lumad, Hashiveni ve'ashuva, ki ata Adonai Elohai, ki acharei shuvi nichamti, ve'acharei ivadi, safakti al yarech, poshti v'gam nichlamti, ki nasati cherpat neurai, haven yakir li Ephraim, im yelet shashuim, ki midei dabri bo, zachor ezkerenu od, aken, hamu me'ai lo, rachem arachamenu, neum Adonai.
Kol hakavod, Rick.
Thank you.
We hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Haftarah Plethora Live. A very special thanks to Norm Gar, who spends hours putting together the opening and closing graphics, its Milli Time segment, preparing the text that you can follow along on the screen, and making musical selections and video clips to complement our chatter. We do invite you to write us with your thoughts and comments, compliments, and criticisms. Our emails are on the closing credits, and also we'll put them into the chat. And if you like our Zoomcast, please tune in each week and forward the link to your family and friends. Last night was the beginning of Slichot, so we know that Rosh Hashanah is coming soon. We wish you all a Shana Tova and Mutuka. We hope that we've made your holiday just a tiny bit more interesting. Shana Tova and Shavua Tov. And if anybody is still here with us, we'll be happy to answer your questions after Norm's closing credits. Good to hear some clapping there.
Yeah. So, open up the floor, if you like.
Joanna, did you have a question?
I want to know where that shofar graphic is that we saw at the end. That was brilliant. Did like one of you design that, or you found that somewhere?
Norm found it. That's a Norm thing.
And Norm is great. Norm has really raised the bar.
And all the jazz behind there, that's Larry's into jazz, so Norm finds different jazz composers to have in the background some for the Millie pictures and all that.
All of the stuff is stolen off the internet somewhere.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And every week he quizzes me and says, "You know what that is?" And I know because he actually told me that this week is Arturo Sandoval. Sadly, Reuven's not on here, our son Reuven, because Arturo is a friend of his.
Wow. I just want to point out that I don't usually focus on the Haftarah. Usually the Haftarah is like the time that the clergy can, go say hello to a congregant or go to the bathroom for the first time in 4 hours.
Yeah.
So I don't often pay attention to the Haftarah on Rosh Hashanah Day 2 specifically. And I had studied the text before, when we studied texts in rabbinical school, but I had never focused on the really poignant connection between the Akedah and Rachel's suffering, and how interesting it is that the way in which it's written in the Haftarah is made to make us also think about ourselves, which is not necessarily how we approach the Akedah when we listen to the Torah reading, but how really clear it is in the Haftarah that we can also look at that story as a way of seeing ourselves in moments of sacrifice or moments of test, or however you want to translate the Akedah itself. So thank you for bringing those connections, because I don't know that I would have made the connection so clearly around parent and children in these two stories.
Yeah,
that's one of Rick's many skills and strengths, is because he knows the Torah readings and the Haftarot so well.
Yeah,
he's constantly finding connections, either in, hey, this trope was used here back in this parsha, and often there's a very interesting link, or he'll say this word was used here and is used now over here.
Yeah. And
so he's made me scramble often looking for those connections.
This is not off topic, but it has nothing to do with this specific Haftarah. That when the conservative movement came up with the idea, and if you heard Rabbi Kleefeld and I teach on this, I guess now 2 years ago, you heard us talk about this piece a little bit also. The reason the conservative movement came up with the triennial for Haftarahs is because if you're reading a triennial Torah reading, you don't always get those connecting pieces. Right? Rosh Hashanah is different because it's the same Haftarah and it's the same Torah reading for everybody. There's no triennial, but when it comes to actual Torah readings, if you're not reading a full Kriya, it's possible, depending on the triennial that you're in, that the Haftarah will have nothing to do with the triennial piece of Torah that you're reading. Sure. And so the idea for Haftarahs, when they were paired up, so to speak, back in the day, was that the Haftarah was from Nevi'im, a way of mirroring and enhancing the Torah reading. And you lose that if you're not reading the correct triennial that it's connected to. So the triennial Haftarah system brings in different pieces of Nevi'im to actually make those connections that it sounds like Rick, could do in his sleep, with different pieces of Nevi'im that might not even be read as Haftarah in traditional shuls, as a way of making sure that there's always a connection between the Torah reading and the Haftarah reading.
Maybe they'll bring in those three prophets who don't get a chance to be read for the rest of the year.
They do bring them in. I can send you the tshuva. It's a very interesting tshuva, and one that right before the pandemic, Beitenu was trying out, because we wanted to make the content connected. But they do bring in those three. I don't know if it's all three, but they do bring in pieces from other prophets that are not mentioned.
Yeah, I'd like to know when they're going to do Nahum and Zephaniah and Haggai. I'd like to try those.
Haggai is definitely in there. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I'd like to sign up for it.
Actually, go ahead.
I was telling Larry when I was singing this, we were practicing. I have things in my head that aren't here because I'm used to those phrases. I messed up on one where it was usually Adonai, but it was Kigan. I thought it was Kigan Adonai, but it was Kigan Raveh because I was just going off of memory. And I've never taught a kid for this bar mitzvah, this Haftarah, because they just don't have it. So this is one of the ones I'm least familiar with. So I had to catch myself a couple times. But anyway, thank you for the compliments. But yeah, I'd like to do one of those, the three that we don't ever do. That'd be nice. That'd be fun.
And it'll be nice because there won't be the commentary in Eitz Chaim. One of the things that Rick and I don't agree on is he likes the commentary in Eitz Chaim, and I generally don't like it. First of all, I find it very esoteric and almost apologetic. Mm-hmm. And I wish they would really dive into the Haftarah more and be a bit more critical about what fits, what doesn't fit, what the themes are.
Yeah.
And I have not found, I'm sure that there are some good commentaries on the Haftarot besides commentaries on the text itself that I sometimes look at, well, I almost always look at, but only after I've gone through it myself and tried to find what I thought were the most distinguishing elements of the Haftarah. Yeah. But it's hard to find. I have not found a book of Haftarot and commentaries that deal specifically with the text.
So Addis Israel in DC created, it's not called a Chumash, I forget what it's called, but created their own book of triennial Haftarot. And they put in commentaries, some from members of the community or rabbis in the community and of the community, I should say, and from other places as well. And when you go to read Haftarah in that community, you don't use the Eitz Chaim, you use this Haftarah book that they have, because it's very specific to, Nitzavim Triennial 1, this is the Haftarah, or, Kitavo Triennial 3, this is the Haftarah. So I can see if I can get my hands on that for you, but I think that would have those connections since it was created for that exact purpose.
Okay. I'll just raise one other point since we don't have any burning questions out there. We didn't include, although I had included it originally in the draft when we were working on it, there's a very interesting aspect to this reading that threw me off at first and threw Norm off as well. And that is, we say that this is verses 2 through 20, when the rest of the Jewish world and the entire Christian world thinks that this is verses 1 through 19. And JPS, and I don't know the reason why, decided to take verse 25 from chapter 30 and to make it verse 1 of chapter 31. If you read that verse in the context of chapter 30, you'll see it fits perfectly as the culminating verse of chapter 30. It makes no sense whatsoever as the first verse of chapter 31. And yet that's what they did. So if you go to any other Chumash besides Eitz Chaim, or maybe any other JPS-oriented Chumash, for example, if you go to Chabad online, you'll see that what we read today is verses 1 through 19. If you go to Sefaria, you'll see it's verses 2 through 20 because Sefaria uses the JPS.
Yes, yeah.
And one other thing we discovered as we were doing it, the Eitz Chaim, the Sefaria version of JPS, and the JPS itself, and the Tikkun, which is not JPS, all have different amounts of the Petuchas and the Stumas. Some of them eliminate some that are actually there in the text. And I don't know if those are simply errors or intentional omissions.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. I'm looking at the chat now, and thank you for the Haven Yakir Lees. I'll listen to them.
No problem.
Yeah.
the Petucha and the Setuma I've noticed before. I generally prep when I learn Torah reading from Tikkun Simanim. And I don't even remember what parsha or where it was, but I distinctly remember this happening, that I prepped once and I got to the Sefer Torah, and what was a Petucha in Simanim was a Setuma in the Torah that I happened to be learning from. Yeah. And I asked the rabbi of the minyan about that, and he said there is flux about that in some places.
Yeah. Yeah, every scribe, I mean, they have their own things. They have their own customs.
How can they have their own things? They're all supposed to copy from a kosher sefer.
Well, yeah, but some Torahs are Vav Torahs, where every column starts with a Vav, and some aren't.
I don't think that it makes, I mean, I'm no so fair, but I don't think that it makes it kosher or not to have those kinds of breaks. I think that the kashrut of a Torah is based on legitimacy of words and other formatting, like Az Yashir and those kind of things, format wise, that need to be the same. But I'm not sure that the spaces, so to speak, that you might find are specific.
Yeah.
I've got a question about the relationship of the trope to the subject, because as you said at the beginning, it's very odd that the trope is stami. It's just plain old trope without anything dramatic, and especially the part about Rachel weeping for her children. That line, you would think that musically they would have done something with that, and they didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, is it? I think you and I had this discussion, Rick, when I was learning Haftarah from you, that sometimes the trope, like you'll have a Revia, going down on a passage where there's something sad.
Yeah, and the only thing I can say, looking at verse 15, it's just it's everyday normal kind of trope. So the only thing I can get out of that is that it can relate to everybody. That it's a common melody that people will be used to comfort the ones who have lost. I don't know. Give them something familiar. I thought a long time ago, why aren't there more? Excuse me. Why aren't there more pazers? Why aren't there more shalshalats everywhere? And it would just be too much. It would be overwhelming. It would take a lot longer, right? If we had to do da 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 da, if that was all over the place, then it wouldn't be as special when they turn up. So yeah, that verse 15. Larry and I went back and forth whether it should be a section by itself, and I convinced him that it was the way the stuma, the samach, appears at the end. But I just the idea of a woman crying for her kids, I think that's enough just to sit there and leave it alone. And then the next two verses bring her out of it with the key that Larry mentioned, that because they're going to return, it'll be okay. But yeah, I've just noticed that the rare trope helped tell the story, but there's plenty of trope that just get common, kind of everyday. There's certain words that just get common everyday trope, and it's up to the interpreter,
And my final comment would be, I think that you can engage with the text in a variety of ways. And the one thing that I've been really grateful to Rick for and to this opportunity this past year, I think we're going to continue so that we will eventually do the entire cycle and most of the special Haftarot, is to have a chance to engage with the text and to tell people, not that there's any one way to engage with it, but you should engage with it because there's something to be taken away from almost every Haftarah. So wrestle with it, try to figure out why the poet, well, especially look for the poetry in the words. And for that, you can't look at the JPS translation since they're basically a bunch of shochets, butchers, when it comes to that. Better to pick up the altar translation and think about the trope and what they might possibly mean.
Yep.
Great. Thank you so much. The one thing I've learned all year is that Larry Herman does not like the JPS translation, but likes every other book's translation and will have all those books near him in order to read you the translation.
That's good.
This was really wonderful. Thank you, really all, but thank you both for
thank you
for putting this together. And I wrote down lots of notes. I definitely will have different things to say about this Haftarah than I have before on the high holidays. So thank you for that.
Well, good.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.